you been to the Library of Congress? If not, Thursdays are the perfect time to visit. Join them after hours for Live at the Library, where cocktails in the iconic Thomas Jefferson Building meets live music, author talks, crafting, exhibits, and more. Every week is different, free, and inspired by the library's collections. Don't miss their summer movies on the lawn, screenings of pop classics from the National Film Registry, starting July 9th with Clueless. Plan your next night out. Visit loc.gov/live. Today on CityCast DC, I'm talking with Jessica Sidman, who just published a wild investigation about DC food trucks in Washingtonian. It seems those rickety trucks that sell hot dogs to tourists down by the mall are a front for what cops call organized crime, not to mention violence, illegal parking, and some truly gnarly food safety violations. Jess is here to tell the whole sordid story. Today is Monday, July 6th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Jessica, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote this great piece this month about food truck mafias. And we use that term mafia a lot, but in this case, you actually seem to mean like literal organized crime.
Yes. So everyone is probably familiar with the food trucks around the National Mall. You know, they're literally everywhere. When you go down there, you've probably overpaid for a hot dog or an ice cream from one of them. But what a lot of people don't realize is that many of them are unlicensed. So they're never inspected by the health department. They pose a lot of food safety risks. They're not inspected by the fire department. There have been trucks that have literally exploded on Constitution Avenue. A lot of times they're ripping off tourists. They're not paying taxes or licensing fees, and sometimes involved in other criminal activity as well. But it's not just a hodgepodge of misfit vehicles. It is actually a coordinated network. And in fact, U.S. Park Police calls it organized crime.
So what's the crime? I mean, surely like these trucks don't make that much money. And typically with organized crime, you're trying to apply muscle either to do something that's illegal or to squeeze someone else out of the business. Like, what is it that they're doing in this coordinated way?
Right. And it's not just one crime. I mean, they're pretty much not following any laws to begin with, you know, not being licensed, parking illegally. There have been instances where they overcharge credit cards beyond, you know, the price that they may tell people, or a lot of times they don't tell the prices. And then there have been some more violent incidents where, you know, usually it's more vendor on vendor violence, where they're, you know, literally hitting someone with their truck because they want a parking spot. And, you know, I tell a story about one guy who was stabbed near his eye by another food truck vendor in a dispute over a parking spot. And then they're evading law enforcement as well.
And does the organized part of it, you know, which is to say there's a few people who control everything, how does that help them evade things like licensure and safety regs and so on?
Yeah. So, you know, these trucks, they do actually face quite a bit of enforcement. You know, they're right there on the National Mall where you have converging local and national authorities. So they do get a lot of tickets. They get towed. But a lot of times, you know, that's just the price of doing business. Or they just don't pay them. Many of them come from out of state, from Virginia. And so it's a little more complicated to go after them. And, you know, if they have one truck that's towed, another one will take its place to do the exact same thing.
So just who are the, like, if it's an organized crime, who are the kingpins and what are they, like, what's their interest?
I would like to say that I got to the very bottom of this, but unfortunately, I should say the very top of it, I didn't solve a crime here or anything. I found, whoever's at the top of this food chain to be quite elusive, and um, so I think. And I think also that's kind of part of the issue here, right? Is a lot of the enforcement is very focused on the bottom of the food chain. These smaller day-to-day infractions, ticketing the truck that's parked in front of a fire hydrant, or, doesn't have hot water, whatever it is. But, there's always a new truck to take its place, and you're not really getting to whoever it is at the top of this system.
So talk to me about this reporting. Look, you've written about restaurants in Washington for a long time. How did you get turned on to a story about, what a lot of DC food people would think of as like a bunch of junky trucks that sell junky food to out-of-towners?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the story that's been there in plain sight. It's not a secret. It's constantly being discussed on Reddit. There's always a new story popping up of someone getting ripped off. I always drive by there and I see these trucks and they have these colorful, weird cartoon characters. And you're like, who designed this thing? And why do they look so similar? Like, why are they all serving the same kind of food?
And it's so different than the trucks you see in the rest of DC.
I mean, well, we'll get into that. What trucks, really? But, I think it's a question really all of us have had. Anyone who's been to the National Mall, like, what's the deal with these trucks? And so finally, I decided, let me find out.
The French have a phrase, joie de vivre, the joy of living. At Alliance Francaise in Washington, D.C., that spirit is right here in your city. Language classes, cultural events, a community that makes French feel like home. And this summer, kids can dive into French immersion camps with weekly themes and field trips. And when you become a member, you save on all of it. Classes, camps, and events all year long. So discover your joie de vivre at FRANCEDC.org. That's francedc.org.
So, and in the course of your reporting, you've got people you're talking to who are inspectors. You've got people from the sort of umbrella group of truck operators. You've got some individual people sort of at the bottom of this food chain. You wind up in Anacostia at a warehouse that sells the stuff in bulk. Why don't we start by, tell me how this is supposed to work? The city, like all cities, has some regulations about food trucks. What's supposed to be happening there?
Yeah, so if you have a food truck, you are supposed to register it, license it with the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection is one of the main agencies that regulates these trucks. You should be inspected by the health department twice a year if you're vending year round. You should be inspected by the fire department and have a propane permit, which they're supposed to display in the front window. But a lot of that is just not happening.
And I mean, that would seem to me to be the fault of the city's government that's supposed to be enforcing that. Why aren't they doing that?
Again, there is, they do give a lot of tickets. They tow a lot of trucks, but it's not enough. DC did decriminalize vending without a license a few years ago. And there is a proposal now by the mayor to recriminalize that and make it a misdemeanor, which would potentially come with jail time. But that is a bit controversial. A lot of the penalties, they just don't have a lot of bite. And, especially DC, the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection, as I was mentioning, there are certain limits on what they can do. They were saying we need 3 or 4 agencies to be able to do the same kind of enforcement that, say, U.S. Park Police can do. They can't call a private tow truck right now, for example. So they have to wait for the Department of Public Works to send one, and those are often not readily available. They, can then impound a truck, but the operator can get it out 3 days later. There's a proposal now to maybe be able to permanently seize some of these particularly problematic trucks. So there are some potential solutions, and there's legislation going through the DC Council to address some of that, but we'll see what happens ultimately.
I mean, you describe this like zoo. You see a guy like literally pouring gasoline, into the generator on the sidewalk. It's splashing around. It was not a super hot summer day like it is right now, but one of the people you're talking to said if it was a hot summer day, there would absolutely be an explosion. I mean, this doesn't seem like it doesn't take like Sherlock Holmes to figure out that there's something amiss going on here. And the city does have inspectors. How come they're like, You're painting a picture of a fairly clueless city.
A lot of it is common sense, honestly. And, I went down there with one of the licensed legitimate food truck operators to just kind of help me understand the scene a little bit more, point out things that were dangerous or illegal. But I almost didn't need him because so much of it was so obvious when you just stop and start and look and listen. I mean, listening, one of the big things, do you hear their generator running? And we encountered trucks that did not have a generator running. And that means the food is not being refrigerated. And, we saw a guy pouring gasoline in his generator that was perched on the side of his truck while he was vending. You're not even supposed to have a gasoline canister on the truck. So there was just so much in every direction. Every fire hydrant had a truck in front of it. It's truly the Wild West.
And you also paint like a somewhat more sinister picture rather than just, a bunch of people breaking the rules. There's this guy, would you call him the lieutenant, who it seems to be sort of coordinating between the trucks, i.e. to keep the heat off. That was my read, at least.
If you sit and watch these trucks for an hour, it's very clear that they all know each other. They're all coordinating with each other. They're doing favors for each other. They aren't just, random trucks lined up there. They're clearly working together. And you can see it if you just stop and watch.
So back me up. Food trucks, they had a moment, maybe 10 years ago. And there was a lot of creative food trucks on the streets. A lot of them have actually turned into brick and mortar restaurants since then. That, according to your reporting, there's just a lot less of that going on in the sort of non-tourist parts of downtown as a COVID casualty or something. So what is left? Like, what's happened to the food truck industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you remember the days of, Red Hook Lobster Pound where office workers would be lining up for an hour for their $15 lobster roll, and the Fojol brothers who, wore these ridiculous mustaches and were selling Indian food and Ethiopian food and lassi pops.
And they all looked down on like what they call dirty water hot dogs, like the street vendor.
Exactly.
Things,
we had this renaissance, in the Obama era, where there were all these unique trucks serving all kinds of different foods. It was the hot new thing in the DC food scene. A lot of, there weren't a lot of regulations at the time, but, a lot of those trucks have disappeared. And part of it, they are a casualty of COVID and remote work. There aren't as many downtown office workers. And part of it also, frankly, has to do with these rogue vendors. When you're competing against people who aren't following the rules, who aren't paying the same taxes and fees, and who are taking your parking spot, it becomes no longer worth it. And so many of those trucks have pivoted to events and catering, or, you know, maybe they've taken up residency at a brewery or, you know, a suburban office park or something like that. So there are actually quite a few of those kinds of trucks still around, but they are not street vending for the most part.
Can I ask this dumb question? Why do they pay taxes and get the proper licensing? Apparently, it's pretty easy to not.
Well, you know, there's this little thing called the law, but
Man, that never stopped anyone. But I guess that what I mean is like, and maybe this just is not a thing was knowable yet. Is there something that enables some trucks to evade the law, but not others? Other than like moxie and not caring. You know?
Yeah. And, you know, the enforcement isn't super strong. I think a lot, you know.
You talked about this like kind of classic DC division where down on like Constitution Avenue north of the mall, I think you wrote that the Park Service has the sidewalks, i.e. federal, and the city officials have the streets.
Exactly. And as I write, it's everybody's problem and everybody else's problem, right? So there is some coordination, but there's also a lot of, oh, well, the other guy is responsible for this, but then nobody is responsible.
The thing about prices was also amazing.
Yeah. So almost none of these trucks list prices. And, you know, if you do go down to the mall and you do decide to order from a truck, always, always, always make sure you ask the price beforehand. I ordered an ice cream cone and got ripped off for journalism. And
How much did they charge you?
I ended up paying $16.50 for the ice cream cone. And I did ask for a receipt. I got the square receipt, and it said the cone was $15 and $1.50 in DC sales tax. So then I went to the DC tax office, asked them about the LLC on this receipt, and they said, we have no record of it. So I paid sales tax that was never paid to DC government.
But also $16 for an ice cream cone. I mean, the guy told you that he looks at someone's watch and it's like if they have a nice watch, he'll charge them more.
Yeah. So, and then I met this guy who, you know, appears to be part of this network. And I was asking him, why don't you list prices on your truck? And he was saying, well, it depends where I'm vending. But also, you know, are you wearing a Casio or are you wearing a Rolex? You know, I'm going to charge the person with the Rolex more. So I think there's a lot of that happening.
Jess, has anybody decided to take these people on?
Not in a substantial way. You know, there was a big coordinated enforcement blitz last summer with 8 different local and federal agencies. And I'm forgetting the numbers off the top of my head, but I think they towed 30-something trucks and they issued a bunch of citations. But then the trucks were right back where they started, you know, not long after. I think we'll see, you know, as I mentioned, there's now this legislation that's making its way through the DC Council that would give DC more power to potentially crack down on some of these trucks. So we'll see what happens with that and if that has any meaningful impact. And maybe, you know, does anyone ultimately try to go after the people at the top? It's yet to be seen.
So the other thing is, I mean, I always thought of these food trucks as like you're down in the mall, it's, you know, 110 degrees, there's no shade, and what are you going to do? But you have reported separately, and you mentioned it in this piece, that the food options, like the official kiosk food options on the mall are about to get a lot better.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that this kind of rogue food truck vendor was saying is, you know, actually, we're doing a service because there are no food options around the National Mall, really. the museum cafes, and you can head a few blocks over for some of the restaurants. And then you've had these kind of sad food kiosks that the National Park Service runs. But just recently, in the last couple months, they've revamped them, and they've turned them into these themed cafes that are playing off of the nearby museum. For example, like there's a Nature's Table cafe near the Natural History Museum, and they have acai bowls and chocolate-covered crickets. And then they're also going to be adding 25 official food carts around the National Mall, which I assume will happen sometime after the 250th celebrations.
And by official, you mean like run by the Park Service?
Yeah, exactly, or by their concession partner. So that potentially could take some business away from these food trucks.
Where do you see this heading, like in a year or 2 years?
Well, it's really up to, DC in a lot of ways. What are they going to do, right? As of now, it's status quo. I don't know that this situation has changed that much over the last several years. I would love to see, more consumer awareness too. If you go to Washingtonian.com, we have a little guide to how to spot a licensed food truck. There are stickers that the trucks are supposed to have from different licensing agencies, but they're not very clear when you're on the street buying food. And I think there could be some room for improvement there. And, I think it's a missed opportunity because it is America's front lawn, right? More than 30 million visitors a year. This is a lot of people's first and sometimes only impression of DC. And we have such a great food scene. It's unfortunate that this is how it's being represented.
Last question before I let you go. We're talking a few days after your piece published. What kind of reaction have you got? Has anyone threatened to stab you in the eye?
Thankfully, no. The reaction has been really positive, and I have heard from a number of legitimate food truck vendors. I mean, I do want to mention that there are actually licensed legitimate food vendors around the National Mall. Again, why it's important to check for those licenses, and again, use those common sense things like, do you hear the generator running? Are they listing prices? Does it look clean? You can just tell a lot by looking. And so they have been very happy to see some attention brought to this subject, and I think they are hoping for change. And I think this is everyone has a story about interacting with these trucks. There seems to be a lot of public interest in this, so hopefully between DC and U.S. Park Police, they can do something about it.
Jessica Sidman, thank you for being here. Everybody should go read her piece about unlicensed food trucks in Washingtonian.
Thank you.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.